over 1 million people who live there. And it's famous because this is where Winnie Mandela, Nelson Mandela's wife, led the resistance during the apartheid era. I mean, it was the epicenter of the resistance against the white supremacist government there. And so I had been invited to come and speak in the community center in Soweto about community transformation, which I did. And I was the third speaker of the day. The other two were Americans. I have no idea how 3 Americans ended up with this assignment. Seems like not a great idea to me, since we are seeing such little transformation in our own communities. I'd have looked somewhere else. But the first 2 spent all of their time speaking to the pastors and community leaders about a research project. A 2-year research project, giving them instructions about how to fill out all of these forms over the next 2 years to come up with some data, and on the basis of that data, they could decide what needed to be done in the community. I mean, it took a long time to go through all of this stuff, and I was just thinking, it just didn't quite feel right to me. And I was looking at these pastors when I'm announced as the third speaker, and I could feel them just thinking, oh, not another one. I could feel it. We can't bear to go through one more of these sessions. And so I asked them, and they were just all kind of glazed-eyed and pretty tired. And I said, how many of you believe today that Soweto is in need of a spiritual transformation? And I asked that question loud. Every hand went up in the room. And I said, now how many of you believe that God agrees with you that this is important? Every hand went up. How many of you believe that God can do this? Most of the hands went up, but not all of them. They said, okay, now how many of you want to know what is the next thing you need to do today in order to prepare for this? Now everybody's awake in the room. And so their hands go up, and I say, no. How many of you really want to know what you need to do next? Yes. How many of you really want? So now they're all shouting out, got the whole room. I said, okay. Here's what you need to do next. Go home. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop in that community center. And I watched these pastors turn sideways and look at each other like, what the heck? They'd seen some of the transformations video. I said, you're thinking, I'll tell you what, I'm going to read your minds right now. You're thinking that because the fruit of God's transforming presence is manifest on a corporate scale, that the beginning of the preparatory process is also a corporate event. But I said, this doesn't start like the beginning of the Boston Marathon with hundreds and thousands of runners all bunched up waiting for the starter's gun to go off. The first few miles of this journey, you're going to run in isolation. By yourself. Not with anybody else in this room. And the question right now is, how bad do you want this? I can't answer that. Your neighbor can't answer that. Your spouse can't answer that. You've got to go away from this corporate gathering now. You've got to get alone with God, and you've got to resolve that question. How serious am I? Am I willing to sell everything I own in order to gain the field with the buried treasure? Am I so convinced of this that I'm willing to liquidate everything? Everything will change. You have to go and find out. So that's where you are today. That's where you are today. We don't want to have group discussions at the moment. We need to have individual conversations with God. And this has got to be very sobering. Because, as we talked about earlier this morning, if you're going to devote something to God, you don't take it back. As soon as you open your hand, it doesn't belong to you anymore. So be careful before you make a commitment or a vow to God or in front of other people. Be very careful. Now, we want to get to the point where we do that. But don't do it casually and don't do it hastily. Here's the good news. God always wants to transform us before he transforms the community. In fact, it has to happen that way. Individual transformation must of necessity precede corporate transformation. But when you have been transformed, when that happens, community transformation has begun too. Because you are a part of the community. So we're always wondering, where will God begin? Well, why don't you choose the place right now? You choose the place where God begins his transforming work in your community. Right here. Come here. Come here. That is your decision. You offer the ground. The Old Testament, God says, why are you so busy building houses, paneled houses for yourself when my house remains in ruins? You haven't even prepared a landing strip for me in the community. Give me your heart without any reservation. Let me come down and transform you. And then when that happens, you begin to look for others like yourself that are abandoned with expectation to this process. And that group, we call them unity kernels, is like that little ball of plutonium in the warhead of a nuclear-tipped missile. It's not very big, but what it can accomplish is beyond our imagination.